Ammonite aggression. David dispatched Joab and his fighting men of Israel in full force to destroy the Ammonites for good. They laid siege to Rabbah, but David stayed in Jerusalem. And so one late evening, one late afternoon, David got up from taking his nap and was strolling on the roof of the palace. From his vantage point on the roof, he saw a woman bathing. Pay attention, back row. He saw a woman who was bathing as he was strolling across the rooftop of the palace. He saw a woman who was bathing as he was strolling across the rooftop. I mind you, after taking a nap. From his vantage point on the roof, he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was stunningly beautiful. The woman who was beautiful. He was strolling on the rooftop after taking a nap in the evening, and he sees a woman who is stunningly beautiful taking a bath. And so David sent to ask about her. And he was told, "Isn't this Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, and wife of Uriah the Hittite, and wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David sent his agents to get her. David sent his agents to get her. He's on the roof. He sees a woman bathing who is stunningly beautiful. He inquired about her to only find out that she is somebody's wife, but he sends after her. And so David sent his agents to get her. After she arrived, he went to bed with her. Yeah. Now, we're not talking about a slumber party. He was on the roof, saw a woman bathing at night, sent for her, and then he ends up in the bed with her. And so, not only was he in the bed with her, but it was during the time of her purification after her period. And so, again, not only is he with her, he is with her in a sense at a time that is somewhat inappropriate from a ceremonial standpoint. So he's there, calls for this woman, sleeps with her, and then sends her back home. Before long, she realized, for those of you who are going to tell me that they were just having a slumber party, after a while she realized that she was in fact pregnant. See, that's what happens when you sleep around. She's pregnant. And so later, she sent word to David, "I'm pregnant." David then got in touch with Joab and sent Uriah, this is her husband, this is the woman's husband, and sent Uriah the Hittite, said to send Uriah the Hittite to me. He wanted to see now the woman's husband. He had already met the woman, and so now he wants to meet her husband. And so when the husband arrived, David asked him for news from the military front, how things were going with Joab and the troops and with the fighting, because remember they were at war. Remember the Lord had told him to take that area, as we looked at verse 1, and while they were off fighting and while they were off doing what they were supposed to be doing, David was off doing what he was not supposed to be doing. And so he brought this man home. He told the man, he says, "Go home, have a bath." Tells the man to go home and have a bath. Seems like to me you had enough trouble with baths, David. But go home, have a bath, have a good night's rest, So basically he's telling him to kind of do some things that he had done. He was taking a nap. Remember, he woke up from his nap and then he went and looked at the man's wife. So go take a nap. His intention here is almost that the man might wake up from his nap and feel like David was feeling. And so after Uriah left the palace, an informant of the king was sent after him, but Uriah did not go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance along with the king's servants. He decided that he wouldn't go home. He's a soldier, so he kept watch, so to speak, at the door of the palace. And so David was told that Uriah had not gone home, and he asked Uriah, didn't you just come off of a hard trip, so why didn't you go home? You know, when you think a certain way, you think everybody thinks like you. And so David was thinking, now look, man, you've been without your wife for a long time. I couldn't resist your wife just looking at her from the rooftop. You came back from the military and you haven't been home. And so the man replied and he said, the chest is out there with the fighting men of Israel and Judah in the tents. My master Joab and his servants are roughing it out in the field, so how can I go home and eat and drink and enjoy my wife? On your life, I won't do it. So now David, who sent them out there, was with the man's wife while they were fighting. But the man comes home and he says, while they're fighting, how could I enjoy myself? Because I should be concerned about them. And so David says, all right, have it your way. Stay for the day and I'll send you back tomorrow. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem the rest of the day and the next day. And then David invited him to drink and to eat. And David got Uriah drunk. But in the evening, Uriah again went out and slept with his master's servants, and he didn't go home. So he thought, hey, you know, the man will go home now. Get him drunk, he'll go home. Nope. Even through his drunkenness, he still had a sense of responsibility and integrity. So in the morning, David wrote a letter to the person over his military. He sent it to Joab. And he told him to put Uriah in the front line. I want you to put him where the action is. And so he wanted to put him in the front lines where the battle is fiercest. And Sister Brittany Moore, they pulled him back and they left him exposed. And once he was left exposed, he ended up getting killed. And so what we find in the verses that are in your bulletin today is we find that they were getting ready to send message to David to let David know that we didn't really win this time. We lost a lot of men. And they were afraid, you know, well, the messenger thought, well, when I go tell David this, David is going to be upset because we didn't win. But Joab said, make sure you tell him that Bathsheba's husband Uriah is dead and he'll be all right. And so when the servant went to tell him, sure enough, he went to tell David, and David became upset. And in the middle of his anger, the messenger says, oh, by the way, this is verse 26. When the wife of it's in verse 25. Then David said unto the messenger, thou shalt not say unto Joab, let not these things displease thee, for the sword devours one as well as the other. In other words, once he heard that the man was dead, he said, well, things happen. And he was okay with it. And so, when your thinking is mismatched, when your thinking is mismatched. And, you know, David suffered from something that a lot of us suffer from, whether we want to admit it or not. One very real and very present thing that we realize is that David suffered from looking and lusting. know that David suffered from that. David was on the roof. I think that we almost could present an argument that this is the first time that pornography comes up in the text, because he's standing on the roof at night and he is watching this woman bathe. Now don't look at me with that frown face, because according to the statistics, one of the leading things that happens on the internet every single day is pornography. So you can look at me and act like you don't know anything about it, but both young and old, and you'd be surprised how young are watching all kinds of things on the internet. It is out there for free, it is out there for pay, and so on and so forth. And there are a whole lot of folk watching the internet and watching pornography on the internet. There's all kind of pornography on the internet. There is straight pornography on the internet. There's homosexual pornography on the internet. There is bestiality on the internet, where people are going with animals, people are going with each other. There are orgies on the internet where people are going with bunches of people. There are grandmothers on the internet. There are children on the internet. And oftentimes we find ourselves, whether it be on tablet, telephone, or text messaging, because there's also texting that they now call sexting. There is phone sex that comes from the internet. There are all kinds of things that happen, and don't look at me with that tone of voice. You don't have to admit it, but you know it. And the fact is, many of us at some point in time have come in contact with some pornography on the internet. Some of you are looking and you're thinking, well, yes, I do, but Pastor, don't talk about it right now because there are children in the room. Let me tell you that some of your children are the very ones who are creating the pornography on the internet. As I'm understanding that there is such thing as exposure, whereby little girls are sending naked pictures to little boys. Not even in high school yet, not even developed. My big toe is bigger than yours, and you're still showing yourself on the internet. Yeah, there's pornography out there, and some of it comes as personal pornography that comes through that wonderful little Snapchat that y'all got, because you feel like it disappears, but there is such thing as a screenshot. So pornography is real in our society, and it is one of those things that from pulpit to pew. Not too long ago, my daughter Jasmine was driving me to class when I was in school for that school that I was doing, and there was an article in Christianity Today that talked about pornography and the way that the congregation views it for themselves and for the pastor. And I was quite dismayed when I realized that this article suggested that over 60% of the congregation on a regular basis engages in watching pornography on the internet. However, nearly 80 to 90% of the congregation felt that the pastor should be fired if he did. And so it's very interesting to me how we look at this particular kind of issue that David had trouble with. It is interesting that we don't necessarily want to have the conversation. It is interesting that I am sure that I have members right now that are very, very uncomfortable because before you left home, you watched some porn on the internet. Somebody watched some last night. Somebody got it bookmarked for later. And so there are people who will look at me odd. There are people who believe that their children are not, that their children really are bathing in the bathroom, but they still stink when they come out. That I'll tell you something. And so there is a lot of Davids marching around. Now, one of the practical ways with regards to this pornography, because I believe, and since you are so silent, let me talk. I believe that it is tempting for many, along with some other things that I'm going to talk about in just a moment, but it is tempting for many. And so let me give you one of the practical things that you might do. If you have a cell phone, then that means that there are some apps that you are able to download. You can hide the app on your phone. That way your friends don't know that you are trying to stay away from certain things. But there's what's called Porn Blocker, P-O-R-N blocker. You type that into your store, and you put that porn blocker on your phone, and you won't have to worry about porn anymore. Now, if you think that you're going to unblock it, hand your phone to me and I'll put a password in it. Because porn blocker comes with the ability to allow a friend to put a password, Sister Green, I need candy, to put a password into the application, and then you will never be able to unlock it or watch porn on your phone again. Now that seems like a sight that some of you say, I'm not going to do that. But I tell you, if you're struggling, that might be something that you need to make sure that you're not on the places where you shouldn't be, so that you're not watching Uriah's wife. Because there are a lot of temptations out there. Now, I said all of that because really it is not just that. Let's talk about addiction. Let's talk about addiction. Because I know that there's some who say, well, now, Pastor, now there's some who are so righteous in here, you forgot that you ever watched it. So this morning you just said, this doesn't pertain to me. But for those of you, if it does not pertain to you, I got news for you. Addiction pertains to all of us. And so for us to say, well, that doesn't pertain to me, let me tell you, you've got some other problems. And yours might be even bigger. Because some of us are addicted to gambling. We can't stay off the west side for nothing. And our money is going to those slot machines. Thank you very much. Our money is going to those slot machines, and our money is going everywhere else because we're addicted to gambling. Some of us are addicted to alcohol and drugs and prescription drugs. And we're buying the black market, white market, and anywhere else we can get them. And don't you think it's interesting that David had a nap? And after his nap, he found himself on the roof. It is oftentimes when you are most refreshed that the devil is looking to do something with you. Yep. It's oftentimes when you're on top of the world, you just got a raise and now you're taking all of your money to the casino. It is as soon as you get married that all of the women want to be with you. Yep. Simply because they want that woman's husband. Soon as you're refreshed, soon as you get a new start, it seems that that's when they're coming after you. As soon as you decide that you're going to stop drinking and smoking and doing drugs, that's when they call you and tell you, come on, let's go out. You tell them, I don't have any money. They say, I'll buy the drinks tonight. I don't have any weed on me. I'll give you a couple of puffs off of mine. And so somebody is always waiting for you at that very moment when you're the most refreshed. And so he had taken a nap. Not only did he take a nap, he was on the roof. In other words, his location was high. It was almost as if he were in the mountains. And you know, when you're up high, when you're doing great things, here he is, the king, and he's at an advantage point, Brother David, where he can see things and where he is there in this high place. And yet, even in the highest place, with the highest title as the king, yet with the most amount of rest after a nap, he's trapped by the fantasy of his own imagination. Let me then say that fantasy is a problem. Because what happens in fantasy is if you look long enough, if you look long enough with regards to something that you are tempted toward, what you will find out if you look long enough to something that you're tempted toward, you will realize that you'll want it more and more. And so as he stood there on the roof, looking at this naked woman, who the Bible even gives us to know that she wasn't ugly. And so the more that he looked and the more that he saw her, the more that he wanted her. This applies to all of our addictions, because the more we look at the thing we want, the more that we'll want it. If you're addicted to gambling and you stay on the west side and you're driving up and down Broad Street and you're looking at the casino, guess what? And so for some of us, we need to stay off of Broad and Georgesville in order for us to stop looking at the very thing that is calling us to it. There's some of us who need to stay out of the liquor department at the grocery store. There's some of us who have to make sure that we position ourselves and stay away from the very thing that is calling our name. And so David not only continued to look, his thinking was mismatched because the fantasy makes us think that we're going to get one thing, but we don't see it all the way through. See, I don't believe that when David called for this man's wife, I really don't believe that David, when he first saw this woman bathing, Sister Vicky, I don't believe that he saw that she would end up pregnant. I don't think that was his intention. I don't think he saw it. I don't think that he thought that far. He thought, I want her. I don't think he thought that the man that was her husband was going to end up dead. I don't think he thought that far. I don't think that he thought far enough to know that, I'm going to give you some more of the story, to know that she would have the baby and then the baby would die. I don't think that he thought about God and how upset God would be at him at the moment when he saw her when she was bathing. And what happens is the fantasy of life catches us and we don't realize that there is a reality behind our action. So at that moment, I don't think he was thinking, I'm getting ready to have a baby. I don't think he thought that he was getting ready that somebody was going to die. But your action, because you're looking too long at that thing that is so beautiful and naked before you right now. And the fantasy says, oh, how good this will feel. The fantasy says, oh, this is going to be completely wonderful. But that one night led to a pregnant woman and led to the murder of her husband. His thinking was mismatched because he gave into the fantasy. His thinking was mismatched, and your thinking is mismatched when we have to scheme to get something. That should be point number one. You know the story now, so I don't have to reread it to you. When you don't care about traps. When you don't care about traps. So he set a trap for the man. When you don't care about traps, he set a trap for the man. He set up several traps. First, he tried to send the man home so he'd sleep with his wife, and then he could blame the baby on the man. Then he tried to get the man drunk, send the man home, sleep with his wife, so he'd think the baby's his. And then finally, he sent the man to the front line to be killed. And so he set a trap. How many times have we went beyond where God continues to put up roadblocks? And we keep pushing. God keeps saying no, we keep pushing. God keeps saying no, we keep pushing. We try to change the laws and the rules in order to get what we want. And so he set some traps in order to get what he wanted. Not only did he set some traps for the man, he was scheming. That's number two, when you're scheming. A scheme, a plan, but it is a sinister plan. And so oftentimes when we ought to be coming up with plans for good, what should he have been coming up with a plan for? He's the king. He's the head of the army. The army is at war. And rather than coming up with plans for the army and the work that God had given him, he was scheming for one night of ecstasy. And so sometimes we are thinking that we're going to get one thing and we get something else. In your mind, you're thinking this is going to be so wonderful. This is going to be so good. The devil doesn't tell you that it's going to last 15 minutes or less. Lens crafters got more integrity than the devil. At least lens crafters tell you in an hour or less. The devil doesn't tell you that this enjoyment is only going to last for a few moments. And so he's scheming when he ought to be planning. And then notice what he does in 26 and 27. Because when the wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned. And when the mourning was past, David sent and fetched her to his house. And she became his wife and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Your thinking is mismatched when you show respect with disrespect. Okay, so the woman was sad and she was mourning because her husband died. David waited until after the mourning period to send for her. Why wait till she finished mourning? Why not just send for her right now? Oftentimes that's exactly what we do. Is we try to do the right thing by doing the wrong thing. Because the fantasy has gotten in our head and makes us think that everything is going to work out. Let me tell you that David lost that baby. David was sick about it. He had many problems with that baby, and then he had problems all the way through his household because the sword didn't leave his house. He was always tormented by death. He was always tormented by children that were going astray and doing some of the same dumb things that he was doing. So congregation, let me tell you this morning, we have to be careful of the traps of the roof. Because it seems that when the Lord has blessed you with some rest, and he's taken you to a place where you can finally soar, where you can see some things, the first thing that the devil wants you to see is the wrong thing. He was in the right place. He was the king. He had a nap. He was on the top of the world, if you will. He was on top of the palace roof. He could see everything that he owned. He could see all around. But the one thing that he shouldn't have seen was the one thing that he focused on.